Wow, what a pleasure to have Harvey Pittel on the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I can't thank you enough. You've been generous to give us some time. Thank you so much, Harvey, for being here, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. It's my pleasure to be here, Donna.
Thank you so much. So for those listeners that actually may not know of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get started in music, and in particular on the saxophone? And when did you decide to pursue music as a career?
Well, I describe myself as a classical saxophonist because that's what I've been doing for 50 years. I started when I was 7 years old, right here in Los Angeles, actually. I grew up here in a very old neighborhood of Los Angeles, which was the Hollywood of the 1920s. It's called Edendale, still there, just north of Echo Park for those Angelenos listening. In any case, I grew up here and started the clarinet at age 7 and was fortunate to be able to study with really wonderful teachers, including the late Coleman Block, who was the principal clarinetist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and with the late Franklin Stokes, who was the bass clarinetist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Later at USC, after high school, I went to USC as a music major. As a clarinet principal and a music education major, I was going to be a band director.
Oh, wow.
And once there, the director of bands, again, the late William A. Schaefer, found out I played some saxophone. I actually started the saxophone when I was about 14 in middle school. My middle school band director, Vern Martin, who's passed on also now, Vern Martin he played 6 nights a week in a club. And I used to listen to him. At noon, he would not open the band room for us all to eat lunch there. Oh no, he locked the doors and practiced.
Oh.
And I would plant my ear on this metal thick door and just listen while he practiced.
Wow.
And he also played viola and owned a Stradivarius viola, as a matter of fact. Yeah, he was an amazing guy. He started me on the saxophone when I was about 14 because he decided we would have a quote unquote dance band, which is what it was called in those years. It wasn't yet called a big band. It was called a dance band. We're going back. And he taught me the fingerings. Michel Zukovsky, the recently retired principal clarinetist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic and daughter of Coleman Block. That's her married name. Michelle just retired from the LA Phil a few years ago. Michelle and I were in school together. And a couple of other people too. We all studied from her father in what we call junior high and then high school. And Vern Martin taught us all the saxophone. He showed us the fingerings. And as a matter of fact, he asked Michelle to get a note from her father that it was okay, because Michelle was, classical clarinet player. And obviously, when Michelle graduated from high school, she was a year ahead of me, she became the principal, the co-principal first clarinetist of the LA Philharmonic at 18 years of age. So these were the influences I was around. The standards were very high. Yeah. And I studied with just the best of teachers who expected the best of me and would not settle for less. I was also really fortunate to listen to great music. My mom and dad were music lovers of various styles. Folk music was big. My mother played great classical music. Isaac Stern, Gregor Piatigorsky, Jascha Heifetz. These were the classical music stars, pianists, cellists, violinists. I heard great orchestras, and I still have the records she played. Some of them are 78s, and the rest, of course, are 33 and 30. But I was around all this great classical music. And then I was lucky enough to grow up here in those years, in the 50s. So it was West Coast jazz time and the beginning of bebop, really, in the early 50s, okay?
Yeah.
And at 16 years old, we could go into what was called coffee houses. So they served wine and beer, but no hard liquor. And so teenagers could go in and listen. Well, I went into the Manhole all the time. Now, that was the late Shelley Mann's club.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay. And I heard the world's greatest musicians there. On Wednesday nights, it was jazz night. You know, Yusef Lateef walked in one night and sat in. You know, we didn't know who they were. We went to Disneyland when I was 16. I would take a date to Disneyland. And in the Carnation Plaza, which is kind of still there, I heard Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald. We would dance to Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald. And then we would kind of dance to, a few weeks later, to Duke Ellington and Sarah Vaughan. And, you know, we were living through what is now jazz history. And I would go up to the saxophone section at the breaks, say, oh, hi. I didn't know, I'm 16 now. Hi, I'm a clarinet player. I play saxophone. And the guys, they were so nice to me. You know, they'd always visit with me. And in one of the sections, was it Russell Prosa? I can't remember. One of the guys was a classical clarinet player for real. And the guy said to me, well, you know, so-and-so is a classical clarinet player, as if that made him all right. You know, I mean, we didn't know, you know, we knew it was great, but we didn't know we were living through jazz history. So I was so fortunate to have great teachers, be exposed to all kinds of great music. I still have my 33 1/3 jazz vinyl collection, a West Coast jazz collection. My first influence was the late Buddy Collette, a great doubler. And I mean, it's a fabulous album. It's called A Nice Day with Buddy Collette. He was my idol. And I went to hear all the greatest players of that time. It was a wonderful time to grow up in Los Angeles. My mother was taking me to Los Angeles Philharmonic concerts. I heard opera in the house because my mom played all these records. My dad loved to sing. He's an amateur, but he loved to sing. And my mom was a singer. She, at 16, wanted to be an opera singer and was told, nah, get married and have a family. So she did, but I think she maybe could have been. I'm not sure they knew anything then. In any case, I was just lucky to be surrounded by all this. It was fabulous. And, you know, looking back on it, I realize. And so when I was at USC, William Schaefer, the band director, said, you know, I need a saxophone player. I understand you play some saxophone. I go, okay. So I ended up playing principal saxophone in what we now call the Wind Ensemble. He called it his symphonic band. And at one point, he did a public television show on the instruments of the concert band or the symphonic band and asked me to do the saxophones. I said, but I don't know anything. He said, well, here's a list. You go to the library and listen to these things. And one of the things was Marcel Mule playing the Concertino da Camera by Jacques Ibert.
Okay.
It was on a 10-inch red vinyl record. I'll never forget it.
Wow.
And I had heard the Marcel Mule Quartet a couple of years earlier. I was at a party and the guy found out I played clarinet saxophone, and he said, come across the street to my house. And he played the Marcel Mule Saxophone Quartet, or the saxophone quartet of the Garde Republican Band, same thing, playing a Beethoven string quartet, an arrangement. And it just blew me away. So at some point, I decided I wanted to be a classical saxophonist because there were no classical saxophone players here then. There were some great saxophone players. Anthony Desiderio was on the faculty at USC. I had studied clarinet with him. He played saxophone. Franklin Stokes, the bass clarinetist of the LA Philharmonic, played saxophone in that orchestra. And I ended up playing also saxophone in that orchestra, sometimes sitting next to Franklin. But there weren't any a kind of dedicated, quote unquote, classical saxophonist. So I looked around for classical, and I needed to transfer from being a music education major to a performance major in classical saxophone. Yeah. So the last year, I think over a Christmas break, I practiced 8 hours a day for a couple of weeks and auditioned to be a soloist with the USC Symphony Orchestra and won, playing the Concertino da Camera. I still have the tape. It sounds like a young player who has some potential and has no idea of what he's doing. As a saxophonist, not the faintest, but nonetheless, it was all of a sudden became a dream of mine to become a classical saxophonist. And I tell people that ask me, especially parents and kids, should I become a music major? Well, my answer is, if you can't not do it, yes, you should. And follow your dream, because you don't want to look in the mirror when you're 40 years old and say, what if? Yeah. So I feel lucky. I've never had to say, what if? So I pursued my future as a classical saxophonist and ended up going to first to Northwestern to study with Fred Hemke, who was very nice to me. And then as it was the era of the Vietnam conflict, they called it. And I was very fortunate to be able to get into the West Point Band. And while there, studied with Joe Allard. So it was a process. And when I first went to study with Joe Allard, I was 23, and I started over completely. Everything at 23. I already had a master's degree in saxophone, but I didn't particularly like my sound. I wanted them to sound like a contralto in an opera.
Okay.
A very dark sound, and it's not my idea now, but I just didn't like my sound. And Joe Allard, first lesson, he had me play a C major scale from middle C down to low C, and then gently, as he did in his lessons, would come over and take the neck and gently pull the mouthpiece out and say it. And he looked at me and he said, Harv, you sound like Harvey Pittel trying to sound like somebody else. He was right on. Wow. And I studied with Joe on and off for 15 years. And when I was about 38 years old one day, I said, Joe, what would you do to this reed? Because he taught me how to work on reeds. It's a big part of what I do. And he said, well, I do such and such, and it's exactly what I was about to do. And I thought, well, maybe now I can go ahead on my own. But I studied with Joe for 2.5 years while in the West Point Band. And then after that, I returned to New York frequently for competitions and then concerts and management and all that. Eventually moved to New York. But
what you're saying to me about the whole phrase, the line, wow, that brought back some memories of what I studied. But it also reminded me of what my trumpet teacher would say. It was Vince Penzarella from the Philharmonic, and he would say, listen to UC Bierling, listen to the great singers, listen to how they phrased, listen to, how they approach the music. Yeah. So this is interesting.
If you go on to access online, Harvey Pittel's visit with Le Maître, Marcel Mule. My wife and I visited with Marcel Mule in 1993. I might have this turned around. He was in 94, and we visited with him on the Mediterranean in his retirement home of Saint-Henri. And his son, who was then 60, the flute player's son, there are two sons, the flute player and the conductor. The flute player's son made this video of the visit, and it was Madame Mule and Le Maître, Marcel Mule. Le Maître means, for those of your listeners who don't know, the master teacher. So Le Maître, Marcel Mule, and Madame Mule, and his son who did the video, and his son's wife, and Sandra Ree, an American student who really became part of the Mule family and studied with Marcel Mule for many years. She was there with her daughter was in his 30s. I mean, it was an amazing collection of people. And we were out on his patio above his garage. And he tried to make the interview about me, but I wouldn't let him. I did, and it's mostly in French. My French was and is poor, and his English was better than my French, but minimal. So the Andreas Eastman Music Company agreed, because that video, VHS European video, was on my shelf for 20 years. And then when I began to endorse the Andreas Eastman saxophones, I mentioned to them that I wanted to put this out and get subtitles, and they said, "Oh, sure," and did it immediately. Yeah, so it's there. It's called Harvey Pittel's Visit with Le Maître, M-A-I-T-R-E, Marcel Mule. About the last 25% of the video, the camera zooms in on him. He had huge ears, for real. I mean, physically big ears. The camera zooms in on Marcel Mule, and Sandra Ree, his former student, says to him, "Papu," that's a term of endearment, "Papu, who taught you?" And Marcel Mule says, "My father was an amateur musician, and he taught me. And then later, I went to Paris and was informed by," now we have subtitles now, because it's all in French. Yeah. "I was informed by," and then he names the great opera singers and the great violinists and the great cellists that he listened to. And that's where his vibrato comes from listening to string players. Because when you listen to early Marcel Mule saxophone quartet recordings, sounds like a string quartet. Their vibratos are exactly alike. I mean, it's amazing ensemble. So again, you see, he listened to the great artists of his time. And he played, there's a famous 1955, 51 recording of Marcel Mule playing with Pablo Casals conducting at the Casals Festival. It's the Brandenburg number 2, the high trumpet part, and the trumpet player had blown out his chops. And they called in Marcel Mule, and he played it on the soprano saxophone.
Oh, wow.
And he talks about this on this video and says, "So I went and I played, and the conductor looked at me, he said, 'Bravo, bravo.'" And Marcel Mule sits there talking to me now. This is 3-4 generations, and said, "Pablo Casals said bravo to me." You see, so Marcel Mule hearkened back to yet an earlier generation. He listened. The classical saxophonists I hear today, I don't think they're listening to their tradition. We have to know what came before us and then build on that.
Foundation, yes. So let me ask you something. How do you, people, I would say to people, listen, but then people are like, okay, I'm listening. What am I listening for? So what would you suggest for people? How do they actively listen?
Well, this is all about consciousness raising. That used to be a term in the women's movement, consciousness raising, when I was growing up. So it means becoming aware of things you didn't know before. So if you listen to great artists of the past and current great artists, and you go to hear, well, we're here in Los Angeles, go to hear the Los Angeles Philharmonic, it's all there. You don't really have to listen you don't have to know anything. You just have to expose yourself to these sounds for a period of time. You can even, they can even be background sounds. It's fine. You just have to be around it. And the more you can be around live performance by great artists, the better. Live. Because hearing something live is completely different from hearing any recording. Playing for a live audience is completely different from playing for a recording session.
Yeah.
Okay. So usually I play for a live audience. So I'm playing for what the sound is going to sound like out there, not next to me.
Right.
Okay. All right. When you're playing for a recording session, you're playing into a microphone and you actually have very little to say about it. Someone's in the booth controlling that sound. But there is a very definite way to do that as opposed to playing live. So I've actually done a lot of recording as well. Now, when I record classical saxophone music, I have some 28 recordings out there. Then I record it in a very special way. That is, the microphone is in the hall because I want to pick up the sound you're going to hear when you sit out there. It's in the hall. We may have a sweetener on the piano, maybe, and maybe a couple little mics for me up close. But basically, it's picking up what goes out there, and I do it in a hall, and I pick the hall carefully. It's got to be a hall that I like the sound, because a hall vibrates with you. It's a part of the performance. So I don't, maybe I'm getting a little far afield here, but you don't even have to know what to listen to. Now, if you know what to listen to, so you've now found your favorite string players, your favorite singers, and if you're talking about classical music, you have to listen to classical music, but also listen to great jazz players live and recorded, because you know what? The great jazz players know how to play the musical line. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
If they're playing a ballad and they go from the tonic to the tonic over here with smoothness and beauty, they may have inflections. And this is what the current classical saxophone players don't understand. You have to keep, the bow has to move. So it's all about our bow is the air column. So the air has to flow and it doesn't change. You can have inflections, but the bow is still moving, the intensity of the bow. If you watch Itzhak Perlman play, the bow is always moving. It's not kind of slowing down. The line is always there. And then he has inflections that go on, but the line doesn't stop. That's what the players are not understanding right now. They really don't. So the classical saxophone players I hear have their own rules to play classical music. Like no one else does that, but somehow it's become all right. It's also about evenness of tone quality. The classical saxophone players I am hearing, middle B, middle C sharp, are not even with anything else, and the palm keys are thin. The altissimo notes are great because that's what everyone is working on.
Yeah, that's true.
So great. I mean, mazel tov, you can play high. I'm happy for you. But we can all play high, and we can all play fast, and we can all play soft down low when we need to or want to. So the message when one plays any instrument for a live audience, in my opinion, should be to move the listener, emotionally move the listener, to forget about their problems, their health problems, their credit card debt, their family problems, to move the listener, to inspire and move the listener. Great jazz players move the listener. Classical saxophone players I hear are saying the following: look how fast I can play. Look how high I can play. Look how low I can play and how soft. Look how much control I have over my instrument. But the audience is not moved. So the audience is impressed for 2 or 3 minutes, and then they're asleep. Now, my mission in my life has been to bring the classical saxophone to the musical public.
Yeah.
Okay. Most classical saxophonists are just playing for each other, which is a whole different bag.
Wow. Do you feel that how do I want to word this? The thing that I'm thinking about, it almost sounds like maybe you're saying they're playing is a little bit robotic, and I'm wondering if that's coming from the fact that they're not seeing live performances, that maybe they're listening to recordings, records, recordings, or even YouTube performances where you don't have that live energy. Do you think that could be a part of that?
I don't know, but part of it is no one's ever told them what I just said to you.
Yeah.
So when I judge contests, sometimes I get a chance to meet the players after the contest. and I talk about this, and they look at me like I'm from Mars. And their teachers, who are college teachers now, look at me like I'm from Mars. They've never heard of it. They've never considered it.
Wow.
Now, the players are playing with lots of emotion. They move around extensively, which bothers me. It's like a dance, moving around. They're putting lots of emotion into it, but it doesn't transfer, because playing is a combination between intellect and heart. So they're putting all this heart into it, but their intellect hasn't quite caught up with what they're doing. They're still not playing. If you don't have the musical line, if you don't play with evenness of tone quality, that's number one, from bottom to top. Every great player plays with evenness of tone quality.
Right.
The classical saxophonists I hear, and some of the jazz saxophonists, not all, once again, middle B, middle C sharp are very thin. Palm keys are very thin, especially jazz alto players. But I've been trying to solve that problem myself with a proper jazz alto mouthpiece for years, and I haven't. So I understand it's not so easy, but still, the evenness of tone quality has to be there. If the evenness of tone quality isn't there, then you can't play the musical line. And if you don't know how to play the musical line, if someone hasn't taught you and made you aware of the line, you're not going to know how to do it. So the people I run into, they've never even considered this, because part of it is they play for each other. But still, even if you're playing for each other, you can make music. And making music means you know how to play the musical line. You serve the musical line. Well, that's not happening in the world of classical saxophone that I hear. I will brag and say that my former students all play the musical line. I have a lot of generations of former students doing really well out there, both classical and jazz players.
This goes back to some of the very beginning stuff that you said, where you started playing at the age of 7, but you've always had teachers that have expected the very best from you. And I think this all stems from that, because you've had people teach you that, where it could, for a lot of folks, they haven't had that that fortune, to have really high quality teachers teaching you from the very begining. So that could be a part of it too.
Yeah, it's also a societal problem today. I heard this on one of your other podcasts, as a matter of fact. The parents that go to school concerts now, they stand up and shout bravo for everything, absolutely everything. So the kids expect, that's the way it's going to be. And, then they come to college and, not that way.
Talk about that a little bit, actually, because oh my gosh. Okay. Yes. All right. As someone who has taught in public schools for a long time, yes, you want to encourage the children. I think it's awesome, but not everything's it's a balance. It's a balance. So talk about this for a second in terms of, okay, so you've got, you've taught through, many universities throughout the years, top universities. What do you see from the students coming in? And, what are your goals for them, as much as you can get them to achieve as you're working with them?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience. I don't know what other saxophone teachers are doing. A few of my close friends, sure, but I can't speak for really anyone else. I think when the kids first get into college, it actually happened to me when I went to USC as well. I thought I was a pretty good clarinet player. Not so. Well, I sat down in the symphonic band. They put me in the middle of the second clarinets, and I heard these clarinet players in back of me in the third clarinet section, and they were like doctoral students that I later came to know as colleagues. And then I heard the two first clarinet players Jerry Kirkbride and Chuck Boito. It's the greatest clarinet sound I'd ever heard. I couldn't believe it. And so I quickly learned that I thought I was a pretty hotshot high school clarinet player. Not really, not compared to those standards. And I think that's what happens to a lot of kids. College, they were famous, quote unquote, in their high school. When you get to college, it's kind of a shock. And the whole experience is a shock. I mean, it's such a difference. I have a 23-year-old daughter. So just recently that we sent her off to college when she was 17, you know. And although she does something else, she went to Mount Holyoke College as an English and French major. And, very proud of her. But it was a change, a big change. She did great with it. She loved it. But the kids I've come across, they have some hard times adjusting. Now, my last 35 years of college teaching, well, I'm teaching at Cal State LA right now, so I'm part-time, 1 day a week. But I teach the saxophone students at Cal State LA. If any of your listeners looking for a college, I'm back at it.
Cool, great.
Cal State LA, which is a great school to go to. It's a great vibe, and it's a cool place. In any case, these kids would come into college and just be kind of shocked for a while because life is so different and the standards are so much higher. I've never considered my own standards very high. I consider my own standards average. I've come to realize that everyone else thinks my standards are very high. It just felt average to me. It's what I expect of myself. So I expect the students I teach the same as I expect of myself.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing an awful lot of playing, and I struggle to keep my own standards just to stay where I am at this time in my life. I'm still learning some new repertoire, but I play the way I play, and I struggle. I wouldn't say struggle, but I work hard to stay there. And I had a performance recently, I think was the best I ever played with an orchestra here at Santa Monica Symphony, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Played John Williams' Escapades, which is half bebop and half classical. It's half classical for me. For some players, they play it all as a jazz piece, and others play it all as a classical piece. I play it half and half, because luckily for me, I grew up during that era of bebop right here, which John Williams talks about in the little introduction to the piece. It's a great piece, Escapades. I played it with the California Philharmonic in last August, and I recently played it with Santa Monica Symphony. California Philharmonic was in Disney Hall. That was my first big performance after moving back to Los Angeles, here where I grew up. Because I was away for 38 years between having come back and taught here and now returning. So my students at the University of Texas, they came from some phenomenal high school programs. The Texas bands are really legendary, really phenomenal, the wind ensembles. And the wind ensemble at the University of Texas, where I taught for 35 years, phenomenal. And the kids would come from some great high school bands, but they were used to a lot of rote work. So the band director would put on a metronome very loud, something I just despise, really loud over a loudspeaker. They'd say, well, we're going to run this section 100 times till we learn it. And they learned it. They learned it that way. Yes. And so it was interesting to see them become musicians, hopefully, and teach them how to practice. I had to teach them how to practice from slow to fast, never skipping a step, ever, and what to do day to day. I would have to do at least one lesson where I taught them how to practice. I dreaded those lessons. It's very tedious. Once you learn how to do it, then you don't waste any time at all. They were used to wasting a lot of time. They were used to repeating something 100 times the wrong way, or playing it faster than they were able to play it, thus practicing their mistake or mistakes, not practicing what was correct. So that was a big thing in college. And then surrounding them with great music performance and great musical sounds and telling them who to listen to. That was a big thing because a lot of them grew up, as I say, really just with the band influence, the wind ensemble influence. And then we had a great jazz program. So gosh, those teachers were phenomenal and they took care of the kids in that way as well. I always encourage my students to be as versatile as possible. I encourage them to study flute, study clarinet. Sometimes I would teach them clarinet. I still do play clarinet, bass clarinet, because I did it for all those years, from age 7 to 21, really. I studied with Mitchell Lurie as well. He's, I was lucky. So I would encourage them to study flute with one of the flute teachers or one of the TAs. Many of them did, and thanked me for it as time went on because they got a lot more work. And flute and clarinet, and absolutely playing in one of the jazz bands. And some of them took me up on that. Some didn't. But many have become really awfully successful out in the world. So I'm proud of them. I'm trying to think of anyone that became a cab driver, and I can't.
It's that exposing them to, as you were talking about this, I was just thinking to myself too, I think for a lot of the, I'm going to say actually my generation and the generations after, so Generation X and afterwards, I don't think we were exposed to good classical music in schools growing up, certainly not at home. And that, that obviously I think has a big effect on when you're going to college. I know for me, I grew up in New York, and WQXR is a fantastic classical station. And the great thing that they did, they put their schedule out in the New York Times every week, the radio schedule. So I would scan for the trumpet, the trumpet solos, because I grew up playing trumpet. And I'd look to see when the Haydn was playing, when Maurice Andre was playing, or when Håkan Hardenberger was playing, or Phil Smith or whatever, and I'd make sure I taped it so that I had something to go off of it. I don't know how I thought of doing that. I don't know why, because I had no influence at all at home or in school, but I just knew that would be my best teacher. But I think for what I've seen as a teacher, but also as I don't teach directly in schools per se now. That's something that's kind of lacking.
Yes. So I know WQXR very well, and have listened to it when I lived in New York and since on the computer.
Yes.
It's a great station. I grew up listening to Maurice Andre, incidentally.
Oh, yeah.
One of my best friends, Marty Barenbaum, he's in British Columbia. He was and is a great piccolo trumpet player, and so he kind of quote unquote introduced me to Maurice Andre. And my son David Pittel is a professional trumpet player here in Los Angeles for the last 15 years, and I know all the names you just mentioned because David plays them for me every time we're in the car. So good for you. It's a huge problem. What disappoints me most about the music programs in our schools, even the best of them, is the kids don't become, as they graduate, they don't go on in their lives to become the audiences we need. They don't, because in the schools, they're not taught to love and appreciate the music they're playing. Because in the case of bands and orchestra programs as well, the teachers are forced to gain trophies and first place winners. And the administration is putting that weight on the teachers, not to mention that the teachers are overworked. Now, in Texas, in Austin, Texas, where I was for all those years, a big middle school band program would have 3 teachers, not 1, 3, right? And the high school programs, 4, maybe 5. Yeah, bands of 300, marching bands of 300. Oh yeah, that's what goes on there. So you had all these great technicians coming out who were studying privately. Every student in those middle schools and high schools has to take private lessons, and the parents pay for it. So lots of my students just stay in Austin, Texas, and make their living teaching in schools to this day. And then in Austin, they have what's called ACE, Austin Saxophone Ensemble, which gives 4 concerts a year, draws about 500 paying customers to each concert. These are my former students and a few others that weren't my students that play serious saxophone ensemble concerts. And then they have a youth component for middle school and high school. And these kids pay to be in this program. And it's unbelievable what the kids are doing with saxophone ensembles. So there's a lot going on, but the idea is when they become adults, will they go to concerts?
Yeah.
When they become adults, will they play their instruments? Some do, but not many. Yes. But after that, will they become listeners? Will they appreciate classical music? Not really. It's not happening anyway. And we need audiences, as you well know. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of, there's a lot of senior citizens at the concerts I go to and the concerts I play. You go to hear the LA Philharmonic, there's a wide cross-section. The Santa Monica Symphony was a wide cross-section. But that aside, I've played 4 orchestras here since I came, and most classical music concerts, chamber music concerts as well. It's mostly senior citizens. So where is our audience going to come from? And the jazz audience too. We need jazz audiences. You know, jazz clubs, and there aren't enough of them here. Very few. But the jazz clubs draw other players, which is fine, which is great, and hobbyists. But where is the musical public? And what does the public think that jazz means to them? That's a big subject. Most people have no idea. They think jazz is the blues, or jazz is Louis Armstrong, or
jazz is pop music played on a saxophone.
Yeah. That's the other thing about classical saxophone. When I tell people, I really am a classical saxophonist. I am the real deal. That's how I've made my living for 50 years, okay? And I tell people here in Los Angeles or wherever else I go that I am a classical saxophonist. The word classical, they don't even hear it. The word saxophone to them means pop music and or jazz, period. They have no idea what the classical saxophone is. None. They've never heard it. So there isn't even a point to begin talking about what I do when someone asks me. So we've been talking about this for years. When I started studying at Northwestern with Fred Hemke all those years ago, he used to say concert saxophonist. That still doesn't mean anything to people. The only thing that means something is something like I'm a featured artist with symphony orchestras. Maybe, if they've gone to symphony orchestra concerts. So, plus I've done a lot of pop music, and I can play jazz styles, and I've done recordings. I'm not a jazz artist because I don't improvise, but I can do the rest. And I've done quite a bit of it in my life. So, but they have no idea what classical saxophone is. And there's more repertoire now for the classical saxophone than any other instrument, period.
Do to yourself.
Well, in part, there's a lot of players, and a lot of colleges which are turning out a lot of classical saxophone players, and the composers in those colleges write. I have a part of it. Yeah, I am a part of it. But my mission has been, as I said, to bring the classical saxophone to the musical public, where most classical saxophonists I don't know that they've defined what it's all about. Maybe they teach and they play for each other, and I never quite understand when I hear them talking about their important performances, because their important performances are always playing some new piece at a saxophone convention. That's never been my priority. I've done it, but it's not what what I like to do the most. So.
Yeah, it almost sounds like the onus is on, it is difficult. You mentioned this before, and I've mentioned it in the previous podcasts, like, school teachers today have so much pressure. They have to teach to the test. They even have to teach other subjects when they're teaching band. So it is hard for public school teachers, but it seems like the onus is on the private teachers if a student's taking private lessons, but also on the college teachers to bring back the idea of the tradition of listening to the tradition, whether it's classical, whether it's jazz, but it seems like the onus is on those teachers now.
Well, once again, it's a societal problem. You have to change the way people think, because even the college teachers have to have their saxophone quartets and their students win contests.
Yeah.
You see, I judged a contest actually back in Austin a year ago or so. I heard a middle school saxophone quartet that was so good, technically. It was just they were playing Maslanka saxophone quartet. I couldn't believe what these kids could do. I just couldn't believe it. They won all the awards. They didn't necessarily make any music. So the teachers are forced to see, the students go online and listen to all the other players, the saxophone players. They don't listen to great string players. They don't listen to their tradition, getting back to that.
Yeah.
And maybe the onus is on the teachers, because the teachers have to make them do that. And one can, as a teacher, do that. I did it.
Yes.
But it's a challenge. It's really a challenge, because we're teaching these. So here, on the college level, here you're teaching this advanced player, can play anything technically. And you have to stop and teach he or she music appreciation, because they know nothing.
Yeah.
So now, am I qualified to teach music appreciation? No, not really. Is it what I want to do? No. Do I like doing it? No, I don't. No, because it's a lot of work for me, because that's not what I've been doing all my life. But I've had to get into it to a certain extent. At least I know the great artists, who they were, who they are. Have these students ever heard Joshua Bell? Do they know who Rostropovich was? No. So one of my former students, Todd Oxford, I will mention his name, Dr. Todd Oxford. He teaches at Texas State. Todd played in my saxophone quartet for many years. He's a virtuoso baritone saxophone player. Put that away, and now he plays only soprano and alto. He is phenomenal, and he has a great class at Texas State in San Marcos, Texas. So he put up on Facebook Rostropovich playing an encore piece, which was just stunning. And one of the questions someone asked him, one of the comments was something like, "Boy, he's really good." So I made it my business to say, thank you, Todd, for putting this up. This is the very definition of virtuosity. He was the greatest of cellists, a master teacher, because one of the cellists that played in my Harvey Pittel trio studied from Piatigorsky, and a fantastic conductor. See, these kids don't know that. Now, so I'm still surprised, when I say, well, Rostropovich, blank stare. Even Itzhak Perlman, blank stare. You've never heard Itzhak Perlman. I mean, wow. And you're a music major in college. And this is very, very common. This is not uncommon. This is very common. So on the classical side of the saxophone, the students are not taking their tradition. And their tradition is the great string players, the great singers. Once again, I've already said it, or the great string quartets, the great orchestras of our time, from years past and now. They don't listen to the Philadelphia Orchestra. They don't listen to the New York Philharmonic. I mean, these broadcasts are live now. You can, and everything's on YouTube. You don't have to go buy any records. We used to go buy recordings, and I'm so happy because we had liner notes. We could read about things, really hold something in our hand. We don't have to do this now. It's all on YouTube. But when Branford Marsalis does a clinic, as you know, I taught Branford and teach him once in a while still. Taught him pedagogy only. I don't teach anything about playing music. That's because he's already really a great musician. When he does a clinic and starts to talk about music, jazz and classical, he just takes out his iPhone, goes to YouTube, holds up the mic, and plays things from his iPhone right on through the mic. Just talks to the crowd. He's just doing what they need here because they don't understand. They don't have any background. They don't take the time and trouble because, especially the younger kids, they want everything to be immediate.
Yeah.
So once again, it's a societal problem as well because our society wants everything to be immediate as well. That's part of our life. It's part of life that frustrates me when I come across it daily. But nonetheless, that's it. But everything is not immediate. That's not the way it is.
Yeah.
So many generations now have grown up with technology and think that technology is the end, but technology is the means to an end. The end is dealing with one another. The end is face to face. You know, the end is person to person. It's about people. You know, it's about being here to help others. That's what we're here to do, in my opinion. So a lot of this is getting lost in technology. People don't understand that technology, once again, is not the end. It is a means to a happy life, not a happy life because in and of itself.
You know what's
to do with music making.
This is so interesting because I know there was some news reporter or something like that. He offered people, okay, if you can go 1 year without your phone, I'll pay you like $100,000. Right? You may have seen that on the newscast and stuff like that, right? And no one would really want to do it. And it's funny. I keep thinking to myself, okay, I'm still of a generation where we grew up without technology until a certain point. Until for me, it was like after high school, and then like computers, started to become. Well, even in college, I had a word processor. There wasn't even a computer, it was a word processor, right? So that part of technology didn't come until afterwards, but I've seen it with the youngest kids. I mean, they grow up and, the parents put a phone in their hands when they're 2 years old and they're sitting there playing games and whatnot. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And that's the whole societal thing. That's the problem. And it's so interesting because this is such a bigger problem than people think. But, I think one of the things that listeners can take away from this, and we have a lot of teachers that listen too. Yes, you have to listen to what your principal says in your administration. You have to win your awards and that kind of thing. But perhaps if there's a way to find 5 minutes to start up your rehearsal with listening to a classic piece of music. And the thing too, and I'm going to ask you this in a second, but even if you have if you have a jazz band, you want to listen to a classic jazz piece of music, from the greats, and wind ensemble, or orchestra, you want to listen to a classic piece of music for these kids, there's no classical stations on the radio in most cities anymore. There's not even jazz stations on the radio. It's more, contemporary jazz is another type of jazz. There's that, but there's not even that either. So I think for those teachers listening, I think affording your students the opportunity to have like 5 minutes of listening or a listening day per week,
Sure.
I think will greatly benefit people. But you had mentioned before, you don't consider yourself a jazz artist, but you grew up listening, to the great people. So that probably helped you in terms of speaking the language,
Sure.
in terms of the phrasing.
Absolutely, without doubt. Sure. And I still play my vinyl records. I have a turntable.
Yes.
I love I used to call it my progressive jazz collection, because that's what it was called in the early 50s, progressive jazz. But it's really West Coast jazz, yeah. And beyond. When Miles started to combine jazz with funk, I left. I didn't dig it. I couldn't get into it. But that was already early 70s. Yeah. So my collection, is from 1950 or something to 1970, and it's great. Plus, I still listen to jazz. I mean, I still listen to the great players. Only recently, I have met some kids that want to learn to play jazz that know nothing about who preceded them. It disappoints me. Up to now, though, I've been very impressed with students studying jazz on all instruments, because they do study the great players, So yeah, it's a thing. It's a societal problem, and yeah, I think your suggestion is very good. The teachers could just play a little something and maybe tell the kids where to go on YouTube, because as you said, they don't know what they don't know, and we're not passing on our culture to next generations, and that's kind of a shame. So, yeah.
Do you think that people that want to study jazz, play jazz, do you feel that it would be good for them to also listen to the classical greats?
The great jazz players and the great jazz students do that now, automatically. Yeah. I'll go back to Branford Marsalis. Now, Branford, he plays classical saxophone and jazz saxophone. But even before he played classical saxophone quite as much as he does now, he was listening to the classical greats, always. And he tells me what he listens to on planes, Wagner, Strauss, it's like heavy stuff. He told me at one point that he was only practicing classical saxophone, and actually it was proved then. I don't know what he's doing now. He practices a lot, Branford. He practices a lot. So, and I have several students who play classical and jazz and do it really well. I'm very impressed with them. Paul Haar teaches in Lincoln, Nebraska, does it beautifully. Dr. Jeff Benedict, who is the retired professor at Cal State LA, he's a professor emeritus. So my former student is a professor emeritus, and I am too. So we call each other Professor Emeritus, Professor Emeritus. It's unbelievable. But Jeff is a great jazz player. He has a quartet here in town. They play a lot, and he's a great classical player. He got his doctorate with me back in the early 90s. Charlie Richard, also at Riverside Community College, as Jeff still teaches. The Riverside Community College has a great jazz program and a great classical program. It's an amazing place. So Charlie Richard, another one of my former students, does both really well. There are many, many more I'm leaving out. And I'm talking about guys that really improvise really well, have studied it for their lives, and play classical saxophone really well. But it's a thing. I'm waiting for the classical saxophonists to start to play for the musical public more, because that's been my mission, to bring the excitement. My original mission was to bring the excitement of playing jazz, because that's what I was trying to do for actually quite a few years. I tried to bring that excitement into classical saxophone, to bring that to the musical public. That was my mission. Now it's just to bring the classical saxophone to the musical public. John Williams' piece Escapades does that really the best, because it's a combination of both. But people still come away thinking of it as a jazz piece, probably. They don't really hear the difference, maybe, or don't remember it. So when I play Ibert, I play the Tableau de Provence by Paul and Maurice, or any of the French pieces, or any of the more recent Romantic American pieces, then people get it. But even then, even the orchestras here in Los Angeles, because we are in Hollywood, really. This is showbiz time.
Yes.
They're not choosing that more serious repertoire. They choose my lighter repertoire. And my saxophone quartet, Harvey Pittel saxophone quartet, we were on the road for 30 years. And we played what was then called community concerts. It was 539 towns in North America. And we were on that circuit for a good many years. And we modeled our show after Canadian brass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we did a 2-hour and 5-minute show, choreographed, all special arrangements, very little original classical saxophone repertoire, very little. All special arrangements done by a number of our colleagues and friends. And basically that was the format. It looked like we were very casual, but it was very rehearsed, really. And we changed it over the years. But I learned early on that if you went to some of it was the musical public that we were playing for now, across North America, in big cities and little towns, the musical public, not college music majors, okay? So I learned early on that if we started with the Grave and Presto by Jean Riviere, about halfway through the introduction, I would hear. Now I'm sitting on stage now, I would hear. Oh my God, is this ever going to end? Are we ever going to get to the fast part? No. And yeah, so I learned early on that you have to take the audience from something they know to something they don't know. That's an important educational principle that you know well as a teacher. Yeah. A public school teacher and a private teacher on both trumpet and saxophone, you know all that very well. You have to find something the audience is familiar with and take them to something new. We did that. So at the end of a concert, they would know that the classical saxophone was invented by Adolphe Sax, that we were playing classical music, that we could play the Bach toccata and fugue. You know, see, that was a gangbuster right there. I mean, that was a standing ovation right there. They knew J.S. Bach, you know, but at the same time, we played a Glenn Miller medley done for us specially, and still do. Once in a while, we still get together to play. Not all the original players. I think maybe now I'm the only original player. I mean, we did a concert a few years ago where 3 of the 4 of us were original quartet. But we started the quartet here in Los Angeles. And I still run into people who say, I heard your saxophone quartet at Caltech. That was 40 years ago or something, you know. It's unbelievable. They still remember. And they still think I teach at USC all those years ago.
You know, it's interesting what you're saying. So you brought, and I actually just recently interviewed Tim Price we're talking about kind of the same things, him jazz, you classical. And one of Tim's concepts was about sidewalk symphonies and how he did this past summer in the Philadelphia area, just bringing jazz to the public. Right. And what the thought that came to my head, 2 things actually. Number one, bringing these types of, and I know people do this with folk music. I know a man, Dave Rush, who does this in New York, in Buffalo, the Buffalo area. But he brings these edutainment types of performances to schools. And that's where your audiences are going to be. Because if you bring this to the elementary schools and the middle schools, and then it piques some kids' interests, I think that's going to really help to, you know, inspire some kids and have them understand a little bit more about the music. The other thing too, though, and you said it, I was going to say this too, you have to go with where the audience is at and then bring them from there to somewhere new, a new adventure. Have you thought about like how to use social media to do that?
Yes. Yes, I've thought about it, and I actually have. I have my own IT guy now because I'm so inept. See, I grew up in an analog world, right? So, as you've I do experience this morning. My computer chops are thin. I'm working on it now. I have been hampered by the fact that I want to play live, like put it on Facebook, but I've never been happy with the sound that is coming out. So I'm now buying some recording equipment that will solve that problem because I want the sound to capture the middles and lows that in my own sound, because I have my own rich sound, and the middles and low overtones are part of my sound. And when they don't come out, then it sounds like it's not me.
Right.
So I'm working on it. But what you say bears what you say is very important. I think that's maybe how we can reach people. It's an interesting challenge. What brings the standing ovations when I'm playing right now is the encore that I do without pausing to breathe, because I circular breathe. That's what people remember.
Yeah.
That I circular breathe. That's what they take away. I mean, I've painted a picture in musical sound for them. I have moved them. I know I've moved them. I know it. They do tell me that. Painting a picture in musical sound is also very important. The classical saxophonists I'm hearing have one tone quality. That's it. They play from loud to soft. They only have one tone quality. You have to paint a picture in musical sounds. Play dark sounds, play bright sounds, play everything in the middle to express what you feel about the music and what the composer wanted you to do. Great violinists do this, great cellists do it, great singers do this in both pop, jazz, and classical settings. I don't hear classical saxophonists doing this. They play with one sound. Well, I try to play with a palette of sound. And that's what my pedagogy is all about. It allows you to do that because it's based on a reed that produces a rich sound, rich in overtones. It is not based on hampering the sound. It is not based on cutting out overtones in the sound. It is based on having a sound with all the overtones present that you then know how to mix and match to make different tone qualities. This is very important. That is if you want to be an artist, if you want to achieve artistry and move the listener.
Right, like a painter.
Exactly, like a painter. Yeah, exactly. So this pedagogy allows one to do that, where some other pedagogies are exactly the opposite. They limit the sound.
Interesting. This is very interesting. I'm going to switch directions for a second because I want people to be aware of something that that you created that I think will help a lot of people, various stages of their playing or whatever. And it's called the hand ease, the Pittel hand ease. And I had heard about this. I actually saw you doing a Facebook demonstration on your page, and it was from a couple of years ago, but I had also heard about it from, oh my gosh, I don't know if it was Paul's magazine or somewhere else, but
Paul Hart did a thing on,
yes, that's what it was. Yeah, talk about the handies.
Well, decades ago, my saxophone quartet was in someplace in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, maybe Portland, and we had to be in Pasadena like the next night, and my thumbs failed. That is, and I'll be very specific about this joint and this joint.
Yeah.
At the time, the doctors called it overuse syndrome, or interestingly, English horn thumb. And now they have more accurate names. And since then, also this thumb, this joint and this joint. So these two joints, so I could no longer hold the soprano saxophone. I was in severe pain because even if you use a neck strap with the soprano saxophone, it's heavy. See, we should never lift anything here. It causes all kinds of pain and injury in the end. Also, when you have weight on your thumb, it's harder to move your fingers. Joe Allard taught me this years ago. When you let go, it's easier to move your fingers. The hand ease removes all the weight from the right thumb, hand, and arm. No more weight. You have to see it. My website is down right now. I'm working on getting it up again. If anyone wants to know, you can contact me at harveypittel.com. My last name is spelled P as in Peter, I-T-T-E-L, Harvey, Harvey at harveypittel.com. And I'll send you some pictures. You must use a neck strap or it has no bearing. It is attached by you remove your own thumb rest, and with the same little plate and screw, you install our thumb rest, and then everything fits into that. It comes from the saxophone to the body like this, and then there's a plexiglass piece that goes across wherever you want it to, your chest or middle here or stomach. It's entirely adjustable in and out, up and down. You can use the thumb. So when I play soprano saxophone right now, incidentally, your thumb should be here where your first finger is. When we play clarinet, it's way down here. That's some of the saxophones too. So this allows you to, when I play soprano saxophone, I don't even use my thumb. Okay. So we need to do this action, yes, but not lift. So there's no weight anymore on the right thumb. So there's one iteration for all the saxophones, and there's another iteration for clarinet, oboe, and English horn. And it does the same thing. It removes all the weight from your right thumb and arm. So we're in Portland, and we stopped off in Oakland at a flute maker's shop. Corregulus was his last name. John Corregulus? Someone will know the name. He's since passed away. I recently met his daughter, interestingly. He actually made the first handies. One of the guys in the group, Vince Ganoyak, who teaches in Kansas. See, there's another guy who plays jazz and classical very well. Vince drew a picture of this thing, and he made me what was to become a very crude version of what I brought to market about 3 years ago, the Pittel handies. And I used that from 1983 to about 5 years ago. And it occurred to me as I retired from teaching full-time college saxophone that for years after concerts, I would be standing with free hands and my soprano saxophone was just sitting there. I didn't have to hold it because it just sits there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I thought, I should make this available to everyone. And I'd be visiting with people like this, no hands. It's just sitting there. I didn't think anything of it for years. We played about 1,500 concerts. I mean, we played a lot. Then I played a lot of symphony orchestra solo appearances, and everything else, all those years. So when you play the alto, tenor, or baritone saxophone, if you allow the weight of the saxophone to rest against your body, you don't need the handies. But for those players that enjoy holding the saxophone out from your body, then you do need the handies. In my opinion, especially for soprano saxophone and clarinet, it's a no-brainer, especially soprano saxophone.
Yeah.
Soprano saxophone is so heavy and can avoid injury. Plus, even if your thumb doesn't hurt, you can play so much faster, so much easier. So it has, I'm proud to say, it's saved several careers now. And the response from the clarinet players is greater than the saxophone players, to my surprise. I have to use it on clarinet, so it allows me to play clarinet. If I didn't have it, I couldn't play clarinet, because I still play some kind of okay clarinet. I studied those years, and then I play better now than I used to because I have this other pedagogy, Joe Allard's pedagogy and mine. The same for clarinet saxophone. Doesn't matter. The angle of the instrument's different. That's it.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Do you use it do you use it now? Like, you performed at the Santa Monica Symphony. Do you use it now when you're performing?
I use it on soprano saxophone. Oh yeah. But
okay.
I don't use it on the alto because I rest the weight of the alto on my body.
Got it. Okay.
In my opinion, that's what one should do. But some players like to hold it up. If you hold it out, then you need the handies.
Right.
But I don't, So for alto, no, but for soprano and sopranino saxophone also, I have to use it. I don't have a choice because I cannot lift the weight of the instrument because I wore out these joints of my thumbs. That's simple. Yeah. Thank you for asking about it, and I'm glad that you like it. I feel it's a contribution. I feel good about that, So if anyone wants to know about it, Harvey at harveypittel.com. I will soon, I think within about 10 days, I will have a website up once again. I had a website for a couple of years, and it's a long story. But anyway, it's down, and I have a new one coming up. So,
What will the website address be?
I think it's going to be pittelhandies.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll put it in the show notes as well for those folks. And I will tell you that I did buy one. I also have a problem with those two joints, especially my left thumb, but I was starting to get the same problem with my right thumb. And I did buy the handies. And folks, I got to be honest with you. Everything that Harvey said is totally true. It's great because, if you like to hold the horn, I mostly play tenor. If you like to hold the horn out away from you, it takes all the weight off your right thumb. And it really does, it just makes a huge difference. It really does. And it's interesting because what you said about the soprano sax, especially, I see guys playing without a neck strap. And I'm like, wow, how are they able to do that? For me, it's always been very, very heavy because your right thumb is down. It's not in a natural position. It's not in a natural grabbing position. So it makes it, on the saxophone, it makes it hard to hold it up when you think about it. I also think about the kids that are in marching bands. We just had the Rose Parade going on, and the way they're holding the horns, I think to myself, I can only imagine, what some of them probably are not in any kind of pain. That's awesome, but some of them probably are, the way they're holding the horn out from them.
I've been trying to get it into marching bands for the last 3 years, and I haven't had any success. I even talked to the marching band directors about this being akin to football players wearing the proper equipment.
Yeah.
But I haven't had any success. And we've offered to, if there are any marching band directors that would like to try it, that is the gentleman that actually makes this. It's made in San Antonio, Texas by one man. He makes every piece by hand. We're not making this in China.
Yeah, wow.
It's a handmade thing, and it's just me and the guy that makes it for me. I do own the patent, which was an interesting experience in itself. But in any case, if there are any marching band directors listening, try the Pittel Handies, please contact me at harvey@harveypittel.com, and I would be glad to talk to you about letting you try it and seeing how wonderful it is. Because I tried it out on some students in Austin, Texas, some high school students. They loved it, but the administrators of the schools wouldn't let the band give it a try as a whole. The kids loved it. They were dancing with it because, like with the clarinet, well, you can do all kinds of movements with your arms now. You can have one hand under the instrument, be going like that, or both hands up, and the instrument just sits there.
Yeah.
Plus the fact that in any marching band section, saxophone and clarinet sections, you can totally regulate the height of the section.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So, plus it, above all, it saves the kids being injured, and many of them are injured from this. Many, many, many. I having played clarinet all those years, growing up as a clarinet player. I mean, my thumb always hurt. I had a huge callus, and from age 7 on. So, but those people that play soprano saxophone, as you described, they will incur injury. That happened to me. I did just that. I thought I was so macho, I didn't need anything. Well, so.
Well, I think it's a fantastic contribution, and we're definitely going to be putting the links, in the show notes on how to contact Harvey about that. And I myself will definitely do a review on this as well and point them, to this, because I think it's a tremendous contribution. And I know it's definitely helps me, and obviously it helps you, and it helps a lot of people. So I think it's super important. So I wanted to end with a couple of questions that maybe it'll make you think a little bit, but um, these are from my co-host Nick, and I kind of like these. These are very interesting. So and I'm going to read these actually. What's one piece of educational material that you couldn't live without back when you were first playing, but also one piece of educational material that you can't live without today? Got to put you on the spot.
You say educational material, that would be like a method book or something? Is that what you mean?
It could be that. It could be also the dreaded word technology. It could be something that you definitely you find helps you or helps your students.
Well, in all my decades of teaching, I would have to say, Scales and Arpeggios by Marcel Mule, book 1, published by Leduc. Actually, book 1, 2, and 3. All my students went through them, and the other one would have to be 48 etudes by Fairlane, plus 12 additional etudes by Marcel Mule, published by Leduc. All of my students went through all of those books, especially the Fairlane book, because every slow Fairlane, and about half of the 48 plus 12 etudes, so 60 etudes, are slow. Every slow Fairlane teaches the student to play the musical line. Once you get through the Fairlane book, you know how to play the musical line forever. For me, as far as classical saxophone, that's what I would have to say. That's a great question.
And actually, it's interesting because your answer actually probably answered the next question that I have, which was, what's one thing that you make each student, play without a doubt, without exception? What would you make them play? And I tend to think it's what you just said.
Well, I teach them to do something called matching overtones.
I know what that is. Yep.
So the saxophone is controlled 50% here, the area of the throat, which goes from down here up and includes all 13 muscles of the tongue, and half here. This addresses the area of the throat, which is huge: glottis, epiglottis, larynx, pharynx, trachea. It's called matching overtones. And this is maybe one of the first things that I talk about with beginning students. They don't have to change their embouchure, they don't have to worry about it yet, and they become aware of what goes on here. It must be done exactly correctly when practicing. If it's not done correctly, it does no good.
Right.
And it takes a few weeks, a few lessons for students to understand exactly how to do it. It is a meditation on the saxophone. It is a meditation between, it is communication between the saxophone and oneself. It's in a way sacred. It's in a way a prayer. It's like praying for those that do that. Matching overtones. And once you can do it, once you understand, it's what I practice, it's what I begin with every day when I practice. And I have to practice every day. Now, I took a little time off. I'm sorry I did. I'm back at it. I have to practice every day, and that is the first thing I do without fail. Matching overtones to this day. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. That's awesome. Another question for you. What's one personal quality or characteristic that you feel will make someone successful in music? It doesn't have to be financially successful, just successful.
Well, Joe Allied said. He wrote me a letter of recommendation once. When Joe Allied wrote you a letter of recommendation, you sat next to him at his dining room table, and he did it while you were sitting there. There was nothing mysterious about it. And here's what he wrote in the letter of recommendation. Harvey Pittel displays a healthy curiosity about the saxophone. Sincerely, Joseph Allen. Now, I'll never know whether that was the highest compliment or maybe he didn't think that much of me. I don't know. But we used to talk about having a healthy curiosity about what you were doing. And this gets into his study of philosophy. So that's the one characteristic, having a healthy curiosity about whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
My son, David Pittel, he teaches at Cal State Fullerton. He has a great class. He's a very busy trumpet. David has the healthiest curiosity about the trumpet I've ever seen. And he's been at it for many years. He's a great player. And he just gets better all the time. He always has a healthy curiosity about the trumpet. And maybe I've helped imbue that with him. I hope so. And I try to have a healthy curiosity about the saxophone. That comes from Joe Allen. I think that's the one trait. So if you have a healthy curiosity about something, you will pursue it. You'll work hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the Vince used to say to me, have the mind of a child, the openness.
Well put.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Wow. Okay. One more.
Yeah.
What is one musical purchase you've made under or around $100 in the past year or two that has benefited you and that can benefit others? Like your students and stuff.
What a question.
I know.
That's a great question that really doesn't apply to me. Unfortunately. Let's see. I'm trying to think what I might have purchased that's new.
Could be an album.
I buy a little sheet music once in a while. I'm at a stage in my life now where I kind of know what I have and what I like, so I really am not buying more mouthpieces, okay? And I use, an old 2-screw Selmer ligature, which they don't make anymore. So I'm really not experimenting. Well, the one purchase, under $100. Oh, wow. Yeah. Had some very expensive overhauls on my horn by a great guy. Under $100. I will say this. I find one reed out of 30 for each instrument and then have to work on that reed. So for each concert, it cost me $150 in reeds.
Oh, wow.
I'm usually playing soprano and alto. Sopranino too, but I don't play that much. So I think that's where the expense goes and the upkeep of my horns. So I guess that question needs to be asked of someone younger that's still trying to find what they like, the ultimate equipment. See, I found the ultimate equipment for me. It's not the ultimate equipment for everyone, but it is for me.
Right.
I've had the saxophone I play since 1966. So, really, and the mouthpiece about the same. So 65 for the saxophone, 66 for the mouthpiece, So I'm just hoping it all doesn't change. The saxophone actually got better because this name is Mike Cleveland. He's an amazing guy, and he takes care of violins now. He lives a long way away from me, but it's worth it. So.
Oh, interesting. And so tell us a little bit about your equipment. So what saxophone?
Well, I think the best saxophones being made today are the Andreas Eastman saxophones. I like them very much, and I don't come to that lightly, I might add. Roger Greenberg, my very close friend and colleague, he and I were in the West Point band together in the 60s. Roger now lives out here, and he works for the Andreas Eastman Company. And he has developed these saxophones over the past several years. He wanted me to endorse them, and I said no for a long time until finally their model called the 52nd Street horns came out. And I just love those horns. Now, so I endorse the Andreas Eastman horns because, again, they're the best horns being made today. Now, my horn that I play, I've been playing it for 50 years, so it's hard for me to make that change when I perform with an orchestra. When I do clinics for Eastman, then I play the Eastman horns, and I like that very much. But I play a 123,000 Selmer Mark VI alto, and I actually sold my 85,000 Selmer Mark VI tenor. I sold it because the 52nd Street Andreas Eastman tenor is so phenomenal, unbelievable. It's just as a jazz saxophone, as a jazz instrument and a classical instrument. So for what I do on tenor saxophone, it's actually better than my coveted 85,000 Mark VI. My soprano saxophone is also a Mark VI that I got decades ago. So I've been playing these instruments, and my sopranino is the same. I've been playing these instruments for so many years that it's too hard for me to make a change now. I mean, what's important to me is my sound, the richness of the sound, and I'm so used to those instruments. But I like the way I sound on the Andreas Eastman instruments as well.
Wow. And you know what, and this would be a good way to end too, just to kind of wrap this up. I think your best teacher has been what you've listened to, what you've been exposed to, and that's formed your tonal concept. And Joe Allard brought that out of you, got you out of your way, and brought that out of you. And regardless, yes, you need to play an instrument that's comfortable ergonomically, and you're used to its quirks, its tendencies, but that tonal concept is going to come out of whatever you play, whatever instrument.
The website that you know all about, it's a YouTube thing. On the Andreas Eastman YouTube site, Harvey Pittel presents the teachings of the master Joe Allard. Has really everything on it. If your listeners need a teacher, of course they can contact you. They are also welcome to contact me. But they can go right to that site and see a lot of the concepts, because the pedagogy allows you to stay out of your own way and realize the sound you hear in your own head. So you put it very well. Yes.
Because you know what? That's a brass concept. People don't realize it, but you can't play, and you know this from your son, you can't play a brass instrument until you can hear that sound in your head, because the horn's not going to make the sound for you. You're going to make the sound, and it's a brass concept.
That's a great point, and that's a point that many young players on all instruments don't realize, that this is an aural activity, A-U-R. You have to listen. It doesn't come out automatically just because you're blowing and fingering. You have to listen. It's a magnificent idea. We're given this gift. Mitchell Lurie, the famous clarinetist, used to say, we're so lucky to be able to put an instrument in our mouth and make sounds. And we are. I mean, it's a gift. And if we have that gift, it behooves us to develop it, maybe. You have to listen. Yeah.
Absolutely. And on that note, I wanted to thank you so much, Harvey, for all your wisdom. This was so inspiring, and I think it's really going to help a lot of folks.
It's been a pleasure, Donna. Thanks for having me.